Josep Borrell has called on South Africa to use its influence in BRICS to persuade Russia to give up the war in Ukraine. Borrell is being hosted by International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor. Govan Whittles is there, and he joins us for a debrief of sorts. So while South Africa is being encouraged to use its close ties with Russia to persuade Russians, they did mention, though, the European Union, that they're not asking for Africa to choose sides, just to err on the side of international rules-based world order.
Yes, Dudu. Well, the response from the South Africans at this point is that it's not just our job to convince the Russians to stop their ongoing war with Ukraine. The Minister of International Relations, Naledi Pandor, saying it's a global effort that's required here, hinting that it may be unfair to ask South Africa to intervene here and ask the Russian government to stop that war. Interestingly, the European Union's High Representative on Foreign Affairs and Security also saying that they're treading a fine line by respecting South Africa's sovereignty and its right to decide who it conducts military exercises with, but that they believe the timing of the scheduled naval military exercises with the Russian and Chinese governments due to start on the 17th of February, and that timing coinciding with the start of the Russia-Ukraine war is not the best. That's the way that Mr. Borrell had put it here at this press conference. This conference could be characterized by disagreement all around. Disagreement on whether or not South Africa should be intervening to convince the Russian government to stop their operation in Ukraine. Disagreement on the future of South Africa's citrus imports into the European Union, an issue for which there's at least 50 billion rand at stake for the industry and 50,000 jobs at stake, noting that South Africa's citrus producers in 2022, by and large, more than two-thirds of them recorded losses, much of it because of some of the restrictions that have been placed on those imports to Europe. They're having to pay much more to transport the citrus via containers to the other markets in Asia and in the United States. And then also seems to be disagreement on whether or not the grant component of the Just Energy Transition Partnership should be increased and by how much. Here's an interesting figure. South Africa has put a costing to how much the Just Energy Transition would cost it, and it's put that at around $98 billion US. Currently, the funding that is being offered to South Africa to transition, to a just energy transition away from fossil fuels is 8 billion rand. That $8 billion US. That's, of course, a shortfall of $90 billion US. At the moment, the International Relations Minister saying that they're doing a costing based on the grant and the concessional loans of $8 billion US that they're planning on getting, and they're acknowledging there's a wider gap, that they spoke to their partners about increasing the grant component, especially because the concessional loans terms are quite restrictive and their interest terms are not beneficial to South Africa. But those are the other issues involving trade which have a real impact on South Africa's economy, but it really was the Ukraine and Russia issue which dominated the discussions. They didn't agree. It's clear that the European Union delegation expressed their displeasure at the position South Africa's taken, while saying that they respect its right to hold that position. And then, something of a surprise here, the European Union encouraging all of its members to participate in the sending of tanks to the Ukraine area. That is something that Germany is doing, and something that the European Union says it approves. The South African delegation here wouldn't be drawn on about whether or not it would be plausible or fair for tanks to be sent to other occupied territories. In fact, the minister saying it wouldn't be plausible because it hasn't happened in the last 75 years in Palestine, and she doesn't see it happening now.
That cleaner and cooler energy transition bears all the hallmarks of a messy situation playing itself out, Govan, especially when you consider that in South Africa, at least, we've got top-tier coal that is being exported, and apparently the figures reported that reaching, 700% already. But interestingly, Mr. Borrell also touched on the political and security situation on the continent, saying that they cannot impose solutions, but they can partner with South Africa to contribute towards security in the DRC, Mozambique, etc. However, our international relations minister, Naledi, Pandor, reiterating the fact that you have to ensure that all countries and all people's voices are heard. This issue of multilateralism cannot be used for the privilege of a certain few. Guess you can read between the lines there.
We can, and the conflicts that she was referring to are obviously the ones in Cabo Delgado, the north of Mozambique, where South African military is involved in the SAMIM deployment. That's the SADC military operation, which is currently underway. The European Union delegation due to go to Botswana after this. Botswana, a member of that SAMIM deployment, they're saying that they are allowed to be concerned and take an interest in how that issue is being dealt with. Remember, the gas pipeline, which is at stake there, run by Total, a French company, a member of the European Union. The European Union, well within its rights to express its interest because of the financial interest of the French government in that region, were that conflict to be resolved. During that conflict, there are rights issues at stake and potential economic growth for Mozambique and investment countries such as France, members of the European Union. So quite rightly justified to be interested in that specific conflict. And of course the delegation here also discussing, at least after South Africa had raised it, the issue of reform in the United Nations Security Council. South Africa had been pushing for Africa to be granted a permanent seat on the Security Council with veto powers. That's really what South Africa has been pushing for. No commentary from the EU delegation on whether or not they expressed their intention to support such a move if South Africa had to bring it to the United Nations Security Council. But of course it is something that the administration of Cyril Ramaphosa has been pushing for since its inception, and after the last ANC conference it became clear that it would continue pushing for a permanent allocation on the Security Council for one of the African states.
Govan Whittles, thank you very much for that update.